Chapter 555. But the Navy was still the Navy. If it was a naval battle, with the strength of the Yang family's navy, there was no need to be afraid of anyone. But this time, what they wanted to do was to occupy the dock and land, which was a lot more troublesome. Advanced artillery could allow the Navy to take down Keelung Port, but in the end, they still had to land. The dock was originally a huge slope, which meant that the soldiers needed to attack it. This was equivalent to putting their bodies in the hands of the enemy. Maybe they could take it down, but they didn't know how much they would have to pay. In comparison, if the army could make a breakthrough, then the Navy only needed to provide artillery support, which was much simpler. But what should they do when facing the countless trenches? On this issue, some officers put forward various ideas, especially the newly established staff department in the military. They proposed to flood the trenches. As long as a large amount of seawater was poured into the trenches, the enemy hiding here wouldn't come out and wouldn't retreat. In this way, the initiative of the war would naturally be in their hands. It had to be said that the idea was good, but it was too difficult to implement. First, they had to solve the problem of water. Although there was no shortage of water nearby, how could they draw the seawater into the trenches? It had to be known that the terrain here was high and low. And even if they could borrow the large water pump made by the munitions factory and the power plant to bring the seawater here, did they consider the amount of work? Besides, the enemy wouldn't just wait there and wait for you to flood them. Wouldn't they find a way to drain the water away? In the end, they really didn't know when to stop. Some also said that they could use grenades to open the way and blow up the trenches. This method was not feasible. First, they didn't know where the enemy was. If there were no enemies, wouldn't it be a waste of grenades to blow up the trenches? The number of grenades needed to cover a few hundred acres of land was too large. Second, if you just blew up a trench and thought it was safe, but the enemy moved here in time, wouldn't it be suicide to rush in without any preparation? So whether it was flooding or using grenades to open the way, they were all rejected. In the end, all eyes were on Yang Chendong. It seemed that in their eyes, there was nothing in the world that could make things difficult for the sixth young master. Facing the anticipation of the crowd, Yang Chendong displayed the bearing of a leader. His face was full of confidence, as if he was telling everyone that none of this was a problem. As for how he was going to solve it, he never said. Now that Yang Chendong had finally arrived at the front line and could already see the crisscrossing trenches in the distance, Lang Song and the other army officers once again placed their expectant gazes on Yang Chendong. Today's weather is good, very good. Yang Chendong didn't seem to notice that everyone was looking at him. Instead, he looked up at the sky and seemed to be in a good mood. Among the officers who didn't know why the sixth young master said this, some of the more impatient ones couldn't help but ask for a solution. But Yang Chendong's voice was a step ahead of the others. What's the rush? Didn't we agree that the attack will officially start at 9 o'clock? Just let the soldiers conserve their energy. After being pointed out by Yang Chendong, the officers really didn't know what to say. Some people couldn't help but look at their watches. It was not even 8:20 yet, which meant that they still had 40 minutes to prepare. That was equivalent to going down and watching how the sixth young master would create a miracle. Everyone was waiting. In the entire frontline command post, only the occasional ticking sound of the watch on each officer's wrist came from time to time. The silence lasted for more than 20 minutes until it was 8:50 a.m. Suddenly, there was a commotion among the soldiers of the various regiments and battalions. What's going on? As the commander of the 1st Division of the army, and also the only division commander of the army, seeing that the battle was imminent and the sixth young master was by his side, but the soldiers suddenly acted strangely, he was very dissatisfied. He was even more afraid that the sixth young master would blame him, so he immediately looked at the 2nd Regiment commander Luo Pa beside him. Luo Pa naturally understood the meaning behind it and hurriedly walked out of the frontline command post. But before he could ask the soldiers what was going on, he saw everyone's hand gestures. He couldn't help but look up at the sky. The scene that appeared in front of him gave him a big fright. In the originally clear blue sky, there were suddenly 20 large balloons flying in the air. Visible flames could be seen under the balloons as they slowly moved towards the battlefield. This is the Eagle Unit. Luo Pa was also one of the senior officers in the military, so he naturally knew of the existence of the Eagle Unit. He also knew that the training of this unit was very mysterious. Even he didn't know the details. The only thing he knew was that the military would provide a large amount of military pay to them every month. Considering that it was directly approved by the sixth young master, the officers below him didn't have any complaints. But they never thought that this unit would actually be an army, and that there would be 20 of them. When they appeared in the sky, they immediately gave people a feeling of the might of gods. People of that era, even if they were educated, most of them would only know how to read and do accounting. Only a very small number of people would study ancient studies. These people could already be called great scholars. But without exception, these scholars wouldn't study the matter of the birth of all things. In their view, it was just an unorthodox method, just a strange technique that couldn't be put on the table. It was under this kind of thinking that made them feel a sense of reverence towards the heaven and earth that they had never studied and understood. It was just like how the legend said that people could fly into the sky and travel through the earth. That was just a legend. It was something that only the mighty and immortals could do. It was impossible for humans to do it. Just as everyone thought so, the Eagle unit appeared. Not only did they appear, but they also soared in the sky. Although the distance between them and the ground was less than 200 meters, this was already beyond the expectations of humans at that time. Some superstitious soldiers even began to put down the guns in their hands and kneel on the ground to worship. They couldn't be blamed for doing so. Decades of influence made it difficult for them to come into contact with such profound matters. Although those who could become the cold vanguard had a certain degree of cultural foundation, for most soldiers, it was limited to reading and reading maps. Sorry, they didn't have the time to learn anything more profound, and they couldn't learn it. Luo Po's knowledge was naturally different from ordinary soldiers. But even so, he was still shocked by the sudden appearance of the Eagle unit in the sky, so much so that he forgot to report what he saw to his division commander. Only when the 3rd Regiment's commander Wuxia also walked out from the command center and stood beside him, similarly revealing an expression of disbelief as he looked at the sky, did Luo Po finally come back to his senses. Then, he pulled this former subordinate of his and strode back to the command center. Since the two commanders had both returned, Lang Song looked over with an inquiring look. Wu Shang was still in shock and naturally couldn't answer. Luo Po's excitement and agitation had calmed down a lot. He could now use words to explain the reason. Reporting to Division Commander, the Eagle unit has appeared above our heads. They are hanging high in the sky, no different from gods. What? Upon hearing this answer, Lang Song's first thought was to ask if there was something wrong with his head. But considering that the 6th young master was right beside him, Luo Po shouldn't have said something like this without thinking. In the end, he didn't question him. Instead, he strode out of the command center and said, "I'll go take a look." The truth was the truth. It wouldn't disappear just because someone saw it. When Lang Song and the other officers returned to the command center, everyone looked at Yang Chendong with a lot more respect. They knew that the sudden appearance of this godlike air force was definitely the work of the 6th young master. In this world, he was probably the only one who could do this. As expected, Yang Chendong waited for everyone's attention to fall on him before finally speaking. "That's right, they are the Eagle unit. I call them the prototype of the Air Force. What do you think? Now that you have their cooperation, you only need to follow their commands in the air to know how many enemies are hiding in which trenches. At that time, you can freely choose whether to use grenades to blow them up or directly charge in to kill them." The more Yang Chendong spoke of it casually, the more the officers below were in awe of him. This was their 6th young master, the god of war in their army, the god in the hearts of the people. He was the only one who could always think of the simplest and most effective solution when faced with any problem. After that, it was time for the regimental and battalion officers to walk out of the command center. Yang Chendong also said that there were a total of 18 hot air balloons in the sky. This time, the main forces participating in the battle were 3 cold vanguard regiments and 3 auxiliary regiments. Each regiment had 3 battalions, which was a total of 18 battalions. In other words, each battalion could follow a hot air balloon and destroy the chaotic trenches of the 1st Shang Consortium under their command. Seeing that it was about 5 minutes to 9 a.m., all the regimental and battalion officers went down to the front lines to command the battle. When the news spread, all the soldiers knew that the hot air balloon above their heads was actually their ally, their comrade. Their morale skyrocketed, and the faces of the soldiers turned red as if they had been injected with some kind of hormone. In comparison, the 1st Shang Consortium soldiers who were hiding in the trenches like ostriches were dumbfounded. Chapter 556. The hot air balloons that suddenly appeared in the sky were quickly discovered by them. More and more soldiers knelt on the ground to worship them. It was rare for them to learn any culture, and this was the first time they saw the hot air balloons in action. It would be strange if they weren't afraid and nervous. After kneeling and praying, they heard the cheers coming from the army opposite them. They also saw the soldiers in the same mercenary uniform pointing at them from the hot air balloons in the sky. As long as one wasn't a fool, one would understand what was going on. This is actually an army sent by the mercenaries. Could it be that they have received the approval of the heavens and are here to destroy us? Even the heavens want to take care of them. How are we going to fight this battle? No matter where we hide, they will be able to see us clearly. Won't we still become their targets? The discussions of the soldiers grew louder and louder. It had already caused a huge impact, and the morale of the soldiers had also fallen to the lowest point. The generals of the first Shang dynasty also felt that it was inconceivable. They were also concerned about the morale of the soldiers. At that moment, they wanted to suppress the fear in their hearts. Someone suggested to use firearms to shoot down all the hot air balloons. As long as they succeeded, all the fear from before would disappear with the wind. However, even though their vision was clear, with the distance between the firearms and arrows, it was impossible for them to hit the hot air balloons in the sky. How could a firearm that only had an effective shooting range of 100 meters hit a hot air balloon that was 150 meters away? Not to mention that they were shooting towards the sky. This would shorten their shooting range even further. A series of gunshots rang out, and arrows flew through the air. However, in the end, there was no response at all. There was no response at all. The first Shang dynasty took the lead and fired the first shot. Following that, it was time for the mercenaries to retaliate. Under the command of the hot air balloons, the locations of the enemies and the number of enemies were all exposed clearly. If there were more enemies in a trench, they should throw grenades. If there were only 2 or 3 enemies in a trench, they could directly rush in and fight with bayonets. If there were trenches that were just for show, but in fact, there were no enemies and they could be directly occupied, etc. The mercenaries were like tigers that had grown wings as they advanced step by step in an orderly manner. From time to time, there would be the sound of grenades and gunshots. Originally, he thought that with the protection of these trenches, even if he couldn't defeat the mercenaries, he could at least fight them to a standstill. But because of the sudden addition of the hot air balloons, everything they had prepared seemed so laughable. In just 3 hours, over 100 trenches were occupied and close to 10,000 Shang clan soldiers were killed or captured. This godlike speed of attack had completely messed up the Shang army's deployment. As they retreated again and again, the morale of the army was shaken. Some of the soldiers who didn't want to die began to retreat. They became deserters, throwing down their weapons and fleeing to the rear. Some even hung up white flags in the trenches and surrendered as captives. This was like a spreading plague, and the morale of the Shang clan army was slowly crumbling. Then, like a dam bursting, the morale of the Shang clan army became like a vast ocean. The defense of the trenches, which had been prepared for years, was broken in just 6 hours. Even Yang Qindong, who had been prepared for this, was surprised by this speed. Of course, Yang Qindong had neglected the reverence and fear people had for the heavens and earth. Actually, from the moment the hot air balloons appeared, the morale of the Shang clan army was already broken. It was only a matter of time before they lost. To be able to lose so quickly, it was mostly because they felt that the mercenaries were blessed by the heavens and earth. Then, wouldn't it be disrespectful to the heavens and earth to fight against them? The speed of the army's attack was so fast that it was beyond the imagination of both parties. Outside the Keelung port, the Navy also launched their attack at 9 a.m. The difference between the Navy and the Army was that under the command of Division Commander Gao Xiong, the Navy launched a merciless artillery attack. They didn't seem to have any intention of entering the port. When they were still 3 kilometers away, the cannons rained down on them as though they didn't cost anything. This greatly disappointed the Shang clan soldiers who were prepared to clash with the enemy. Among these 200-plus ships, there were some that were not bad. They weren't small and were worth quite a lot. To them this was a bait. Whoever saw such a good ship wouldn't want to let it go easily, and would want to use it for themselves. If they had such thoughts, they would have to engage in close combat. If that was the case, the Xiangyang cannons could be used to attack from a distance of 1 li away. Perhaps, they might even be able to fight to a stalemate. But who would have thought that the enemy didn't have the slightest intention of taking advantage of them? Cannonballs fell like rain, smashing into the harbor and sinking countless ships. They also smashed into the harbor, sending the Xianxia cannons standing there flying into the air. Don't be nervous, don't be afraid. They will eventually come ashore. When that time comes, it will be time for us to retaliate. The Shang clan generals who were guarding the port still held on to a trace of hope. He believed that the mercenaries weren't here to destroy the ships but to occupy the port. Since they wanted to occupy the port, they had to launch a wave attack. As long as the army could make use of the crisscrossing trenches to block the mercenaries, they would have a chance to turn the tables. Unfortunately, this Shang clan general was destined to be disappointed, because the army that he had high hopes for had actually failed before them. Not only did 30,000 of the 50,000 soldiers surrender, thousands of them died in battle. The remaining 10,000 plus soldiers had already been lost in Sinzu, Ilan and other places and retreated back to the New North Prefecture. It seemed that only by returning to the high city with walls around them, they would be safer. By the time the news of the army's defeat reached the port, it was already noon of the second day. When the general who was guarding the port heard the news of the army's defeat despite the risk of being killed by the artillery shells, he let out a long sigh and led the soldiers who were hidden in various places to retreat back to New North City. At this point, in just 2 days, the Shang clan's external defenses had failed and they had all retreated back to the New North Prefecture. Because of this, their military strength had reached 80,000 men. By the time the army of mercenaries arrived at the New North Prefecture, they saw the tightly shut city gates of the 6 cities. Quickly surround this place. At the same time, clear out any hidden threats and enemies. Kill those who don't surrender. Lang Song, the commander of the 1st Division of the Lang Vanguard Army, gave the order and thousands of soldiers started to get busy. On the 4th day of the war, Jilung Port changed hands. After clearing out all the obstacles, the Navy's ships finally entered and aimed their cannons at the New North Prefecture. The range of the cannons here was enough to reach the New North Prefecture. On the 5th day of the war, Yang Chendong leisurely arrived at the New North Prefecture. Since there were 6 city gates here, it could be seen that this was a big city. He didn't want such a big city to be destroyed by artillery shells. Yang Chendong pointed forward and said majestically, "Department Head Yang, the rest is up to you." Department Head Yang Chendong, Yang Shan, was originally the assistant minister of the Ming Dynasty's Ministry of Rights. During the Tumu Castle incident, he was saved by Yang Chendong and followed Zhu Qizhen to Nanjing. After the southern Ming dynasty was established in Yingtian Prefecture, he was appointed as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. However, because he offended Minister Liu De, he had no choice but to go to Baiming and was saved by Yang Chendong. After being sent to Xianxia City, he was appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs with his own abilities. Yang Shan was good at arguing. Sending him to the first Shang clan to persuade them to surrender was the most appropriate choice. Ever since he came to Xianxia City, Yang Shan's horizons were broadened. Later on, because he was old friends with Yu Qian, he was recommended to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yang Shan, who was ambitious and wanted to do great things, didn't have much of an idea after taking up the position. Xianxia City didn't even have a country. How could there be diplomacy? Although there were many countries that he dealt with on the sea, those people didn't even have the qualifications to come to the island. His position as a department head was just a facade. After waiting until now, he finally had a chance to perform properly. Furthermore, it was right under the nose of Yang Chendong. He knew that this 6th young master had a high status in Xianxia City. How could he not want to perform well? Yang Shan, who was called out, didn't even think twice. He didn't even consider whether his life would be in danger after entering the New North Prefecture. He straightened his clothes and strode towards the city gate with the 2 guards in charge of protecting him. Yang Shan revealed his identity when he reached the city gates. After waiting for about an incense's time, he entered the city on a basket placed down from the city gate tower. "Young master, can he do it?" Seeing Yang Shan and his 2 bodyguards enter the city, Tiger's Mane asked worriedly. "Whether it works or not, we still have to try." Yang Chendong chuckled, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to destroy the New North Prefecture of the 6 gates and the fact that most of the people in the city were descendants of the Han people, he wouldn't have to waste so much effort and could just attack the city directly. However, it would be best if they could achieve victory without the use of swords and spears. As for whether King Shangde would harm Yang Chendong still had some confidence. Unless their entire country was annihilated, it would be extremely daring of them to kill an envoy in such a situation. If they really had such guts, they wouldn't have stayed in the mercenary army's blockade for 3 years. They would have risked their lives to break out of the encirclement. Moreover, ever since Xianxia entered the city, he had been walking with his head held high. Even though he was under the protection of the Shang clan soldiers, he didn't even frown. He had displayed the prestige of an envoy, and didn't tarnish the reputation of the mercenaries. Chapter 557. Of course, it was because of his performance that the soldiers were even more fearful of him. When they thought about how the new North City was already surrounded, they didn't dare to underestimate this powerful military envoy. The first Shang dynasty had only been established for about 40 years and the palace still looked very majestic. Of course, for Xianxia, who had served as an official of the Great Ming dynasty, he was still a little petty. Therefore, along the way, he looked straight ahead, and his footsteps were steady, giving people a sense of confidence. Xianxia was not the only one. Even the 2 Lung Feng beside him had sharp eyes. They were not affected by the environment at all and showed no signs of fear. In fact, these 2 men were also people who had been through a bloody battle. This time, they came with the mentality of win or die trying. They had already tied quite a number of explosives on their bodies. If things didn't go well, they would be able to detonate them with a pull. It was because of the strength of the 3 that the soldiers of the first Shang dynasty couldn't even search them. Using Yangshan's words, what they did was an insult to the mercenaries. That was a heinous crime. Then there was no need to talk and they should just fight. Compared to the upper echelons of the first Shang dynasty, the soldiers only wanted to live. In their eyes, even if they won the war and survived, it didn't mean that they were living a better life than others. After all, in this era, soldiers belonged to the lower class and were rarely looked up to. With such thoughts, they naturally hoped that they could resolve the crisis in front of them through negotiation. Not to mention, many of them had heard through various channels that the commoners who had joined the mercenaries were living a much better life than them. Each of them had their own fields or jobs, so their lives were worry-free and they could even save a lot of money. That was the life that they wanted to live. They successfully arrived at the main hall of the palace. At this moment, all the officials of the first Shang dynasty were gathered here. Even the king, Xianxia, was sitting high up. When Xianxia succeeded the throne, he was only 9 years old. Now, he was only 13 years old. Moreover, he had been besieged since 3 years ago. His territory had gradually shrunk, causing him to live in anxiety and apprehension every day. Looking from afar, although he was sitting high on the dragon throne, his face was pale and his condition was not good. Crimson City's foreign minister, Yangshan, greets your majesty the king. When they were still a dozen or so meters away from the dragon throne, Yangshan stood still and spoke. However, he didn't bend his body in any way to express his transcendent status. Yangshan didn't bow. Many officials of the first Shang dynasty saw this but they didn't express anything. Compared to such unnecessary etiquette, they valued their own rights more. What would happen if the battle continued? What would happen if he surrendered? When it came to patriotism, perhaps it was more of a matter for ordinary people. As people who benefited from it, of course they would do whatever they could. Anyway, they wouldn't be able to become the king, so who would they keep their chastity for? All the officials didn't speak. Although the young king, Xianxia, was unhappy, he didn't say anything about this matter. In comparison, he was also concerned about his own safety. After all, he was still a young man and he didn't want to die. Department head Yang, may I know what you have for me this time? Xianxia personally went up to speak. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the first Shang dynasty was already in a mess. Otherwise, there were some things that didn't require the king to personally go up to the front lines. Once he said something wrong, wouldn't there be no way to turn things around? Yangshan saw everything. After being an official for dozens of years, although his other abilities weren't outstanding, in terms of observation, he was much better than the officials from the Ministry of Rights. When he saw that it was the king of a country who went up to the front lines, he had a plan in his heart. When he spoke again, he was full of confidence. Your Majesty the King, this time, I am here to rescue all of you. Right now, the mercenary army is extremely powerful and the soldiers are all elite. Their morale is high and their weapons are advanced. They have already surrounded the new North Prefecture. If it wasn't for the fact that we are all from the same country, the cannons would have been fired and the city gates would have been blasted open. I am here to give all of you a chance to live. As long as all of you surrender and open the city gates, your safety will naturally be guaranteed. The king will have to abdicate, but other than losing his authority, he can still live a comfortable life. As for the rest of the officials, it will depend on each of your abilities. Of course, your lives will definitely not be in danger. Even your personal wealth will be protected to a certain extent. After Yang Chendong listed out all of his requests, a smart official immediately asked, "A certain extent of protection, is there a proportion?" "Yes, at least half." Yang Shan replied without hesitation. "Half. Only half." After the officials received this answer, they immediately began to discuss. "That's right. Half is a little too little. We have lost too much." Needless to say, the people who made this kind of noise must be the misers group. They belonged to the type that cared more about money than their lives. The discussion below entered Yang Shan's ears, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. He first listened quietly. When these people were almost done talking, he coughed lightly and continued, "You haven't contacted the outside world for so long. I'm afraid you all still don't know what has happened, right? Speaking of which, ever since Xianxia occupied Xichen City, he had completely sealed off the entire Wuxia island from the outside world. In total it had been more than 3 years. These officials had indeed not received any news from the outside world for a long time. When Yang Shan said this, their interest was immediately piqued. Seeing that no one spoke, Yang Shan's eyes flashed with pride. He continued, "In the past 3 years, the powerful Great Ming dynasty has been divided into 3 factions. They are Bai Ming, Southern Ming, and Min King's faction. They are no longer as strong as before. On the contrary, the mercenary army's influence has been expanded and strengthened. Not long ago, the mercenary army sent troops to Jianghu and destroyed the Jianghu kingdom in a month. Of course, we have also negotiated with them before and promised them the same benefits as you all. It's a pity that some people didn't take advantage of it. As for the outcome..." At this point, Yang Shan intentionally paused. This made the officials of the first Shang dynasty, who were listening attentively, anxious. Someone couldn't help but ask, "What happened? Could it be that they were all killed?" Amazing. This mister's guess is extremely correct. When the negotiations failed, the mercenary army charged into the capital of Jianghu. They killed their way into the big cities of Jianghu. Those officials who didn't choose to surrender were all exterminated. Even the king of Jianghu, Li Li, and the crown prince Li Yuanlong were faced with a situation where only one of them could survive. Later on, in front of many people, Li Li personally killed his only son, Li Yuanlong, in order to survive. Now, he is living out his remaining years in Xichen City. Although he lost his authority, his life was saved. It's a pretty good ending. What? Hearing Yang Shan say that Jianghu was destroyed, all the officials were killed, and even the king of Li Li had no choice but to kill his only son in order to survive. All the officials of the Shang dynasty who were present couldn't help but be shocked. The strength of little Wuxia Island was limited. It had faced various dangers in different eras. However, no matter what the outcome was, whether they were defeated or forced to surrender, as the officials of the country, they had no problem keeping their lives. After all, no matter who occupied this place, someone had to take care of it. As the natives of this place, no one knew the situation better than them, right? However, who would have thought that the mercenary army would really kill when they attacked? Even the king of Li Li, who was known to be vicious and merciless, didn't let him off. Didn't that mean that if they didn't surrender, only death would await them? The officials felt a chill in their hearts. Some of the smarter ones were already considering if they should choose to surrender. After all, they had already experienced the firepower of the mercenary army. Didn't they see how their impregnable defense was flattened in less than 2 days? They wouldn't be able to gain any advantage if they really fought with such an opponent. As the officials were calculating in their hearts, the young King Shangda was also calculating in his heart. He had to admit that when he heard that Li Li was willing to kill his only son in order to survive, he was really afraid. As the king of a country, Shangda had never truly enjoyed a day of happiness and high status since he took office. He was young to begin with, and his father had passed away in a hurry. He was the type of person who was appointed in the face of danger. This meant that everything had already begun before he was prepared. Even though he was still young, he had no choice but to think of ways to deal with internal affairs. However, before he could do anything, the mercenary army appeared. After that, they swept through the entire Shang dynasty in a domineering manner. The Shang dynasty was suppressed to a certain extent and lost its vitality. He had been in power for nearly 4 years, but he had actually spent all his time thinking about how to break through the blockade and kill his way out. However, this mission had never been accomplished. Now that someone had finally arrived at his doorstep, his choice had become inevitable. Speaking of which, Xianxia didn't have much of a choice. He, who hadn't enjoyed much on the throne, had thought more than once that it would be great if he could be an ordinary person and live an ordinary life. Now, the opportunity had appeared. As long as he nodded and opened the city gates of New North Prefecture, he would be able to step down from the throne and live an ordinary life. Chapter 558. In other words, he could bear the worst result. Therefore, he did not have any resistance to surrendering. However, he still could not stand Yang Shan's aggressiveness. Even if Yang Shan wanted them to surrender, shouldn't he at least have a good talk? Why did he have to be so aggressive right from the start? With a hint of anger, Xianxia asked Yang Shan in a voice that was still young and hadn't reached puberty, "Emissary, what if we don't surrender? Have you thought about it? No matter if we live or die in the future, you, who appeared here, will definitely be the first to die. Aren't you afraid of death?" The young Xianxia actually threatened Yang Shan. When the officials heard this, many of them panicked. They didn't want to die. If they really killed Yang Shan, it would be tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to become mortal enemies with them. If that was the case, no one present would have a good life. The officials were all panicking. They almost shouted out to stop their king Xianxia. In reality, this kind of thing had been done many times in the past 4 years. For their own benefit, these officials had always been able to band together and force the young king Xianxia to give in. This time, they were prepared to repeat the same story. But before these officials could speak, Yang Shan had already started laughing loudly. After a round of laughter, he suddenly pointed at the high and mighty king Xianxia and said, "Of course, everyone is afraid of death. But if my death can cause so many to die with me, it will be worth it." Swoosh! Just as Yang Shan finished speaking, the 2 followers of Lung Feng behind him had already pulled off the buttons on their outer robes, revealing the densely packed detonators wrapped around their waists. What is that? The sudden change in the situation caused everyone to exclaim in surprise. Some of the more knowledgeable officials couldn't help but exclaim, "That looks like something made of gunpowder." "You are indeed knowledgeable." Yang Shan nodded his head towards the minister, who spoke with a look of admiration. Then, he looked at the other ministers and introduced the item as if he was a salesman promoting his goods. "This item is called a detonator. It's a new explosive that our mercenary army has developed." After saying this, he raised his head to look at the palace. Then, he nodded and muttered to himself, "If everything is normal, these detonators should be able to completely collapse this palace." Hearing that these lightning tubes were actually so powerful, all of the officials' faces changed. Although some of them didn't think that the power of this thing was as strong as Yang Shan said, they didn't dare to gamble. They were all standing here. If it really was as Yang Shan said, wouldn't it mean that their lives would be in danger? Your Majesty, we can't defeat the mercenaries. Let's just surrender." "That's right, Your Majesty. A real man knows when to stretch and when to shrink. Let's lower our heads for now, and in the future." When the courtier reached this point, he couldn't even continue his lie. If the kingdom was destroyed, the king would be placed under house arrest. What future would there be? Many officials started to plead for leniency. Without exception, they all expressed the same attitude, which was that they absolutely could not become enemies with the mercenaries, and even more so, they could not harm Yang Shan. Some of the ministers who held military power had already thought it through. If the king insisted on doing things his way, they could only use their power to restrain him first. The high and mighty Xianxia couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the reactions of the courtiers below. Although all of this was within his expectations, just like in the past 4 years, whenever there was a threat to their interests, these people would advise him with the big picture in mind. They were eating the salary of the kingdom and enjoying the benefits and power that came with being in a high position. However, when the king was in danger, none of them thought for the kingdom. Instead, they were still plotting their own schemes. Xianxia was completely disappointed in them. Among these courtiers, there wasn't even one who was as fearless as Yang Shan. What future did a kingdom like this have? Even if there weren't any mercenaries, the kingdom wouldn't last long. Since that was the case, forget it. If they wanted to surrender, so be it. After all, he didn't want to be the king anymore. Under the pleading of the courtiers, Xianxia finally made the decision to surrender. Then, they put down their weapons and opened the city gates. The mercenaries entered the city and took over. All the courtiers, including Xianxia himself, were waiting in their own residences, waiting for their fate to judge them. Yang Shan completed his mission of persuasion and walked out of the New North mansion in high spirits. Countless mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers entered the mansion in exchange for him. Not bad, well done. Yang Chendong patted Yang Shan's shoulder with a satisfied expression. Next, you will be in charge of taking over the courtiers here. Those who have committed heinous crimes must not be let off. As for those courtiers and merchants who still have a conscience, just confiscate half of their assets. Yes, your majesty knows what to do. Yang Shan nodded his head respectfully. If one wanted to be looked up to and respected by others, then one needed to display one's capabilities. This was a good opportunity to do so. After handing over the task to Yang Chendong, he walked towards the New North Prefecture under the protection and escort of the first and second guards. In his previous life, he had been here before. But at this moment, there weren't any tall buildings like in his previous life. Even the most prosperous streets of the New North Prefecture still gave off a filthy feeling. As he walked, he finally arrived at the palace and saw the last king of the Shang dynasty, Xianxia. King Xianxia, who had been waiting here for a long time, knelt on the ground when he saw Yang Chendong and the rest, looking very obedient. Yang Chendong's gaze landed on the 13-year-old Xianxia and he sighed softly. Perhaps in the eyes of others, it was because of him that Xianxia didn't have the chance to display his talents. But who knew that it was because of him that Xianxia's fate changed? At least it wouldn't be like his previous life, where the first Shang dynasty fell apart due to the chaos in the court and Xianxia was killed by his courtiers. Because of Yang Chendong, as long as Xianxia was obedient, he should be able to have a good ending. The Prince of Sin, Xianxia, greets the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Xianxia knelt on the ground and shouted. Obviously, someone had already told him about Yang Chendong's identity. Get up, Yang Chendong said as he extended his hand to help Xianxia up. It could be seen that Yang Chendong was still very courteous to the Shang dynasty. At least, the courtiers who surrendered would not have the honor of having Yang Chendong personally help them up. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Xianxia may be young, but he had learned this set of etiquette since young and was naturally very familiar with it. Xianxia stood up, and Yang Chendong patted him on the shoulder. Don't think too much about it. The burden that history has placed on you is too heavy. You've also worked hard. Although the results may not be satisfactory, it's not your fault. Next, I will arrange for someone to send you to Xichen City. Your courtyard has already been built. You can live there in the future. For some reason, after hearing Yang Chendong's words, Xianxia's eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this Duke of Loyalty and Courage understood him well. Xianxia knew how heavy his burden was. In the past 4 years, he had not had a good night's sleep. Now that everything had been settled, he could finally have a good night's sleep. Thinking about it, that feeling should be very good. Following the takeover of the New North Prefecture, it represented the destruction of the first Shang dynasty. After the news reached Xichen City, Lord Yuqian, who had already prepared his men, waved his hand and 30,000 educated youths from Xichen City entered Ilan, Taoyuan, New North, Keelung and other places under the protection of 30,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Presumably, it would not be long before these places were completely transformed. A new city that was different from this era would quickly rise from the ground. In a small town outside of Luang Prabang City, one of the territories of the Lansong Kingdom. For the past few days, the atmosphere here was extremely tense. Those who appeared in this area had to go through strict checks before they were allowed to enter and leave. This had disrupted the lives of the people here. However, because this area was under the control of the military, the news could not be spread out. And in this unknown small town, no one knew that the Lansong Kingdom's king, Payasai, was meeting with the Jiaoxi's general, Fan Yuhai. Back then, Fan Yuhai had defended Shiyu City and fought a decisive battle with the mercenaries. After his defeat, He did not enter the city immediately. Instead, he led 20,000 elite soldiers and fled the city, becoming the strongest military force of the Jiaoxi kingdom. As a general of Jiaoxi that had been destroyed, Fan Yuhai still had some capabilities. In the past month, he had actually gathered 60,000 deserters from Jiaoxi. Together with his 20,000 elite soldiers, he had a total of 80,000 men. With such strength, he finally had the qualifications to meet with the Lansong Kingdom's king and discuss the matter of cooperation. In the largest inn in the town, the two sides met. Fan Yuhai first explained the current situation to him. Your Majesty, everyone knows that the mercenaries are as scheming as Sima Zhao. Destroying Jiaoxi is just their first step. They will not be satisfied. Furthermore, you had previously sent reinforcements to Jiaoxi. At that time, you had already formed a grudge. I believe that not long after, once they have completely destroyed Jiaoxi, they will raise their butcher's knife and come for you. However, I wonder if your Majesty has any countermeasures at that time? The moment both parties sat down, Fan Yuhai exaggerated the threat of the mercenaries to force the other party to make a decision and declare war on the mercenaries. Since Paisai was able to become the king, he was naturally not scared. He looked at Fan Yuhai with an unhappy expression. Don't be alarmist. Just tell me what your plan is and how confident you are. Chapter 559. All right. Fan Yuhai nodded. He had no choice but to bring out something useful at this moment. He took out a military map that belonged to the Jiaoxi kingdom and said, Your Majesty, the mercenaries seem to be in control of the situation in Jiaoxi, but in reality, they don't have a stable footing. Many of the prefectures only submit on the surface. Due to the limited number of mercenaries, the ones managing them are mostly the Jiaoxi mercenaries led by Hong Jin. These people basically don't have much combat strength. As long as our army arrives, it'll be easy for them to open the gates and surrender. I'm 90% confident in this. Fan Yuhai paused for a moment. When he saw Paisai nodding in satisfaction, he continued, With this, we can conquer most of Jiaoxi without shedding a single drop of blood. The only troublesome places are the capital, Hanoi City and Xiyu City. However, there aren't many mercenaries stationed here. I've already sent people to investigate. There are only 30 cold fronters, 800 auxiliary soldiers, and less than 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. As long as we use the right method, the probability of eliminating them is at least 80%. The right method? What kind of method? King Paisai asked curiously. Your Majesty, you should know that Hanoi City is currently selling all kinds of goods through trade, right? Then, as long as we dress up as a group of merchants and enter Hanoi Prefecture first, we can take them by surprise and kill them. How can a mere 2,000 mercenaries be a match for us? When that happens, not only can we eliminate them, we can also obtain the most advanced firearms in their hands. After studying them, why can't we have an elite army with advanced firearms? If he could master these guns, he would have the ability to face the mercenary army head-on. Not to mention, we also have other methods to prevent them from attacking us. Seeing how confident Fan Yuhai was, Paisai was tempted. What other methods are there? Your Majesty, when the mercenaries first entered Jiaoxi, they tried to confuse us with negotiations. For that, we paid the price of 20,000 Han civilians and delayed the war by 10 days. I have never understood this matter. Could it be that the mercenaries really care about the lives of the Han people? In fact, when I sent someone to investigate, the news that came back confirmed my thoughts. In every city of Jiaoxi that was conquered, the status of the Han people there became much higher. Is there such a thing? It was the first time Paisai had heard of this. Of course, this did not mean that their intelligence agencies were blind and deaf. It was just that in that era, the people in power valued their own interests more. How many people took the common people seriously? If they didn't pay attention to it, naturally, even if there was such information, it would be automatically blocked by their subordinates. Is this true? Fan Yuhai nodded heavily before revealing a strange smile. Your Majesty, think about it. If we take down Jiaoxi first and control the Han people there, when the main force of the mercenaries arrives, we push these Han people out. At that time, what will the mercenaries choose to do? Those are the people they painstakingly saved. Are they going to kill 100 of them just like that? They will feel heartache. But if they don't kill them, the initiative of the war will fall into our hands. When that time comes, the entire Jianghu will become one of the territories of the Lan Kingdom. You, the great King Paisai, will become the most dazzling person and forever be recorded in the annals of history. Fan Yuhai's words were extremely bewitching. At this moment, King Paisai couldn't help but nod his head. The Lan Kingdom's territory was too small. Even though Paisai believed that he wouldn't lose to anyone in terms of ruling a country, he was ultimately unable to expand because of the territory. Now that Jianghu had become an ownerless object, it would belong to whoever took it. Why didn't he have the right to take it by force? While Paisai was still weighing the benefits in his heart, Fan Yuhai, who was sitting opposite him, opened his mouth again. Your Majesty, there are countless businesses and gold and silver in Hanoi City. Those are all very compact goods. They belong to the kind that is priceless. There was even a young family bank established there. It was said that there was a mountain of gold and silver in there. If one could occupy that place, one would be able to gain a lot of wealth. With money, one would be able to recruit soldiers and buy horses. After becoming strong, it would not be impossible for one to send troops to the Ming dynasty. There is a good saying among the Han people. It is better to have the guts than to be a king. Hearing this, Paisai's eyes lit up. What Fan Yuhai said was indeed a dream of his. The reason why the Ming dynasty was strong was not because their military was strong, nor was it because their governance was good. It was nothing more than occupying a large territory. Paisai had even thought more than once that if he was the emperor there, he would definitely do better than the Ming dynasty emperor. All he lacked was an opportunity to show his talent. But now, after hearing what Fan Yuhai said, it seemed that his great dream could be realized. How could it not make Paisai restless? Previously, his general, Sei, came to report that His Majesty the King would finally meet Fan Yuhai. He did not take it seriously. But this time, after thinking about it, he came to see him. After meeting him, he found that this person was really a great talent. At least, he had a much better vision than the generals in his country. Thinking that Fan Yuhai was a famous general, he could not help but want to recruit him. General Fan, I wonder if you can come to my Lan Kingdom. You can rest assured that once you come here, I will give you the position of general. The soldiers of the entire Lan Kingdom will be at your disposal. How about it? Paisai cherished talent and wanted to recruit Fan Yuhai. He even did not hesitate to entrust him with important tasks. In his opinion, his power and Fan Yuhai's talent were the best combination. Thank you, Your Majesty the King. In the face of Paisai's recruitment, Fan Yuhai accepted with a smile. Then, there was a burst of laughter in the room. Then, the two sides carried out in-depth discussions on specific plans. For example, the matter of attacking Hanoi City first, how to use the terrain to defeat the mercenaries during the attack, the formation of the inspection team, the forging of iron shields, and so on. In a word, they had to use up all the bullets of the mercenaries. Paisai left with a satisfied face. The two sides agreed to take action after a month. The reason why they chose this time was because they needed to constantly send spies to Hanoi City to cooperate with the mercenaries. And this required time to operate. In the room, a black shadow walked out from the dark. This person was not tall and had a very ordinary appearance. However, his eyes flashed with light, giving people a very dangerous feeling. General, why did you agree to join the Lan Kingdom? As soon as this person appeared, he revealed a trace of murderous intent. Even when he looked at Fan Yuhai, his eyes were also in a state of interrogation. Sigh. Fan Yuhai sighed, knowing that he had been misunderstood. He hurriedly explained, Brother Min, you've misunderstood. Why would I want to join the Lan Kingdom? Isn't this to reduce the other party's vigilance? You know that I have received the favor of King Li. Even if I die, I will be a citizen of Jianghu. This will not change. The person called Brother Min was full name Li Min. He was the adopted son of King Li of Jianghu. It was said that he was picked up from the deep mountains and forests when he was hunting. This person had been with beasts since young. When he was first seen, he was still drinking wolf milk. Such a person with a wild heart was given special training after being adopted by Li. He was very powerful. A while ago, he went out to find the elixir of immortality for Li. That was how he escaped the attack of the mercenaries. After receiving the news and returning, he could not find his adoptive father. Li Min found Fan Yuhai to seek a way to restore the kingdom. The difference between Li Min and Fan Yuhai was that Li Min didn't want to defeat the mercenaries. It was too difficult for him to complete this mission alone. His goal was to find the whereabouts of his adoptive father and save him. Fan Yuhai, who knew Li Min's ability, agreed to this request in order to use him. He also said that he would find a suitable opportunity to make a move. As long as he could capture the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, there would be a great chance to exchange for King Li Li. Because of this, Li Min agreed to follow Fan Yuhai. He was the one who heard the conversation with Pa Yisai. He said that he wanted to join the Lan Song kingdom. He did not hide it anymore and came out to question. Fan Yuhai's answer temporarily dispelled Li Min's worries. He did not care about this matter anymore and took the initiative to talk about other things. Baiming's special envoy is here. Do you want to meet him? Of course, I want to meet him. Fan Yuhai did not care which faction came. As long as he could help him, it was fine. In the backyard, a man in cotton clothes was standing under a tree. He looked up at the sky as if there was a beautiful scenery in front of him. As someone who was chosen by Jining and sent here to carry out the assassination mission, he needed to be very vigilant at all times. Therefore, when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, he suddenly flew up. A long sword had appeared in his right hand at some unknown time, and he was already holding it against Fan Yuhai's throat, who had just entered the courtyard. What do you mean by this? Even with the sword on his neck, Fan Yuhai's expression did not change at all. It was not because of anything else, but because Li Min was standing beside him. Nothing. I just want to test your strength. Just as the man finished speaking, a white light suddenly flashed. It was so fast that he did not even have time to react. His right hand that was holding the sword hurt, and then the long sword fell to the ground. Chapter 560. Needless to say, it was Li Min who attacked. After he swung his sword, he solved the crisis and even injured the Baiming envoy. Then he said coldly, "You want to test other people's strength with just this little bit of skill? Save it." Okay. The Baiming envoy who retreated didn't even look at the sword that fell to the ground. Instead, he focused on Li Min. He was indeed a little careless just now. He thought that he didn't need to use all his strength to deal with a defeated general who ran away. But now, it seemed that the other party was indeed capable since he could escape from the mercenaries. Very good. You've successfully angered me. I hope you can perform as well as you did just now. The Northern Ming envoy's gaze became much more solemn. A wave of killing intent even uncontrollably exuded from his body, crazily sweeping out like a whirlwind with him as the center. This was a strong murderous aura that could only be produced after killing a lot of people. If it was an ordinary person, just this murderous aura alone would make them tremble and lose their morale. Unfortunately, Fan Yuhai had led troops for many years and killed countless people on the battlefield. Naturally, murderous aura was useless against him. As for Li Min, he had been with beasts since he was very young and was used to life and death. This murderous aura didn't affect him much. After releasing his murderous aura, the Baiming envoy suddenly had a long sword in his hand. This was why he was so powerful. He had a total of 13 swords on his body. Therefore, the people in Jianghu gave him the nickname of 13 Swords. With a sword in hand, the Baiming envoy rushed toward Li Min with a heroic spirit. Compared to intimidating Fan Yuhai, he preferred this powerful and cold murderous aura that gave him the same feeling. Ding ding dang dang. The saber and the sword kept colliding in the small courtyard, creating a series of noises. The noises attracted the attention of Fan Yuhai's personal guards. A group of 100 people quickly surrounded the small courtyard and pointed their spears at the two people in the courtyard. Regardless of whether it was Li Min, who had been hiding in the dark, or the Northern Ming special envoy, who had good swordsmanship and a murderous aura, these personal guards did not recognize them. Their duty was to protect the general's safety, and they would definitely not allow anyone to threaten Fan Yuhai. With the appearance of the personal guard, Fan Yuhai's face flashed with an unknown smile. He had an idea in his heart. He wanted to test the weight of these two people because he already had a good plan in his heart. Whether or not it would succeed would depend on the ability of the executor. Surround them to say, capture them. After spitting out a few simple words, the 100 personal guards had already picked out 6 10-man teams and rushed towards the 2 top-notch assassins. It was a fair fight for one person to face to kill to kill. The two of them who were in the middle of a fight were suddenly interrupted. Naturally, their expressions didn't look too good.
To say, Li face to say, and the guards to say, to kill to say, he to say, to win to kill to the guards to say, he was to say, to kill the closest to him. To say, he to say, to kill to say, to say, to say, to say, to say, to on to say. To be able to become a top assassin, his IQ was naturally very high. Li Min could tell that Fan Yuhai wanted to test his skills. Since that was the case, he wouldn't be polite. As long as he didn't kill his opponent, even if he severely injured his opponent, it was completely within the boundaries. After all, swords and spears had no eyes, so it was reasonable to injure his opponent. The Beiming envoy was also very angry. Although he had already used his seventh sword, which proved that he was not Li Min's opponent, it was not easy for him to find such a strong opponent. However, for an expert like him, it was not easy to find a strong opponent. He was looking for his own shortcomings through this fight, but now, he was interrupted by someone. It was impossible to say that he was not angry at all. Since the guard's appearance made him unhappy, he certainly wouldn't show mercy. Of course, he wouldn't forget his mission, so he only injured the guards and didn't have the intention to kill. Fortunately, both of them didn't have the intention to kill. Otherwise, Fan Yuhai's 100 guards would soon be replaced. And even if they didn't have the intention to kill, at least half of the guards would have to be replaced. This was because many of the injured guards were saved, but because of their injuries, it would be difficult for them to recover to their original peak state. Naturally, since they were able to survive and continue to be the guards, their strength would also rise to a higher level because of this fight. A real assassin was particular about suddenly appearing, then striking with his sword, seizing the head of his opponent and leaving gracefully. Therefore, when facing an organized army, it was difficult for them to show their strong ability. From this point of view, regardless of whether it was Li Min or the Northern Ming Special Envoy, both of them were somewhat unqualified. They were actually able to remain extremely calm and their attacks were as fast as lightning. Often, after a blade or sword slashed out, a personal guard would be struck and fall to the ground. It was precisely because of their strong ability that Fan Yuhai's eyes lit up. Weren't they the people he was looking for? The Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty was often protected by an organized army. It was naturally difficult for ordinary assassins to get close to him. What he needed was an expert who could kill 100 or 1,000 people. Regardless of whether it was Li Min or the Beiming envoy, both of them seemed to meet this requirement. How could he not be happy? That's right, Fan Yuhai had the idea of assassinating Yang Chendong. The mercenaries were too strong. Not only did they have the world's most advanced firearms, but they also had cannons that had a destructive power that was as powerful as thunder. These were not things that they could resist. It was too difficult to defeat the mercenaries in a direct confrontation. In comparison, it was a good choice to capture the leader first. If he could capture or kill the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty, it would be the best time to disintegrate them when they were without a leader. At that time, when the mercenaries' morale was in chaos, he could use some methods to suppress some and rope in some. How could he not accomplish his goal of restoring Jiaoji? He could even obtain those advanced weapons. Jiaoji would definitely be stronger than before. It should be said that this was Fan Yuhai's goal. The so-called seeking refuge with the Lansong Kingdom was just for the sake of Ampa Yasai. After all, it was very difficult for him to severely injure the mercenaries with his current strength. Since that was the case, it was necessary to find suitable helpers. In his eyes, there were fewer and fewer of the 100 personal guards who were still standing on the battlefield. Although they were also veterans, they were more particular about teamwork. When their teammates were injured one after another, there was no one to cooperate with them. In a one-on-one battle, they were unable to effectively display their abilities and were defeated one by one. In the end, there were less than 10 of them who were still standing on the battlefield. Enough! Fan Yuhai, who didn't wish for the entire army to be wiped out and didn't wish to replace all of his personal guards, finally spoke up. Following which, he invited Li Min and the Northern Ming envoy to the final room in the courtyard. From this point of view, he had already acknowledged the strength of these two people. In this dimly lit room, Fan Yuhai took the initiative to pour tea for the two murderous men who were still out of breath. When he sat down again, his voice had already regained its calmness. Northern Ming's special envoy, right? Tell me, what do you need us to do? What kind of help can you provide us? The Beiming envoy was a straightforward person.
After the test, he didn't seem to want to waste any more time. He raised his head and looked into Fan Yuhai's eyes. He said very generously, "We will provide you with everything you need. We only have one goal, which is to kill the great Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty." This kind of request was exactly what Fan Yuhai wanted. Fan Yuhai could not help but feel happy, but he did not show it on his face. He first looked at Li Min. This person naturally wanted to save King Lily, so he nodded in agreement. Fan Yuhai then looked at the Beiming envoy again. "But how should I address you?" "Shen Kuan." "Brother Shen, this matter is very important. We need to plan it carefully. Do you have a specific plan?" Fan Yuhai asked in a consulting tone. "The plan is up to you. You just need to give me a suitable opportunity to send me to the Duke of Loyalty. With my methods, you should believe that no one can stop me in close combat," Shen Kuan said very heroically and confidently, as if he was the most arrogant person in the world. Unfortunately, just as he finished speaking, Li Min's voice sounded. "I don't think highly of your strength." "HM?" Hearing someone doubt him, even if this person was Li Min, who was stronger than him, Shen Kuan's eyes still revealed a very angry expression. Li Min was unmoved, but what she said next made Shen Kuan's expression soften. He even had to nod in agreement. "I don't think highly of your individual strength, but if you can cooperate with me, I think it will be foolproof." "Okay, I agree. We can work together," Shen Kuan said decisively. For a moment, the three of them couldn't help but laugh loudly. It was as if Yang Chendong only had half his life left and could be taken away by them at any time. Yang Chendong didn't know everything that happened in this remote town. Although the security bureau was established, it was impossible for them to know everything in the world. They only paid attention to the actions of some big cities and important people. But this time, Piasai's actions were very mysterious and successfully avoided the security bureau's tracking. He didn't know that someone wanted to assassinate him. Of course, even if he knew, Yang Chendong wouldn't be afraid. Not only did he have the first and second guard teams, but his own strength had also increased greatly. Especially after having sex with Hu Yan and the other girls, his body's flexibility and strength were at least 50% better than when he was at his peak in the previous world. Chapter 561. He couldn't understand how his body could be developed to such an extent and could only attribute it to the benefits of transmigrating. While his own strength was increasing, after he took down the #1 Shang clan, he returned to Crimson City and walked around the various factories. While he was inspecting, he was also using his warehouse to create miracles. Since he had already become a legend and the commoners already had the impression that he was a god, Yang Chendong didn't mind doing more exciting things. For example, after he dismissed everyone at the power plant, Luan Qi and the rest discovered all sorts of never-before-seen generators the next morning. For example, after spending a night at the steel factory, after spending a night at the military factory, after spending a night at the factory, after spending a night there, Luan Qi and the rest discovered various armored vehicles and 63 amphibious tanks. Everyone was dumbfounded by the miracles created by Yang Chendong. Often after seeing these things, their first feeling was to kneel on the ground and shout that the gods had shown their spirit. However, no one asked Yang Chendong what was going on. This was a question that couldn't be answered. Fortunately, under the feudal society, people's thoughts were too restricted. Few people would ask why when something happened. Furthermore, these miraculous things were only known to a few higher-ups in the various factories, and their influence was still very limited. Moreover, these people were usually immersed in the process of research and learning, so no one would find trouble with Yang Chendong. He stayed in Crimson City for 2 months and spent the new year of 1452 with Hu Yan and the other 2 girls in the palace. The fireworks and firecrackers in the Crimson City Plaza attracted the attention of millions of people outside the city. The current population of Crimson City was already saturated. Out of the 4.5 million commoners from the southern Ming dynasty, 500,000 of them had already entered the various factories in the city after being selected and vetted. The rest had either been arranged into various training schools or allocated to a sizable amount of land. Each and every one of them was living a wonderful life of hope that they had never imagined before. It was also on this night that Yang Chendong and the 3 girls slept together. Only when the sun was about to rise did the 6th young master let the 3 women go, full of vigor. Hu Yan and the others naturally lay on the bed, unwilling to move. At this moment, they began to think about the idea that they had been thinking about before.
They should find a few more sisters, otherwise, they would die of exhaustion on this matter sooner or later.
After New Year's Day, Crimson City showed a flourishing state of development. With sufficient manpower, the factories went all out. Whether it was quantity or quality, there was a certain increase. With Yang Chendong's help, there were many new things. Gold and silver flowed like water into the Red Nest City's warehouse. Yu Qian was so happy that his face turned red. Tian Tian was as sweet as honey. Although he didn't care about money or grain when he was in the Great Ming Dynasty, he still roughly knew how much money there was in the national treasury. How could there be such a rich and abundant city like Crimson City? With money it was naturally easier to do things. Yu Qian felt that he could speak with more confidence, and his back was stiffer. Everything was on the right track. More and more Han people were beginning to adapt to life here. More and more educated youths were learning and becoming stronger every day. Just as another wave of people was about to join the army, Yang Chendong led the 2nd and 3rd Regiments of the Cold Front Army, as well as the 20 auxiliary battalions, and left the island. The new year was coming, and he was about to embark on another expedition. Vietnam, Hanoi City, the former capital of Jianghu. At this moment, it was shrouded in dark clouds. In 2 months, Fan Yuhai and the Lan Song Kingdom had made all the preparations. When the last caravan entered Hanoi City, the total number of soldiers hidden in the city had reached 5,000. In fact, there were only about 2,000 mercenaries in the city, plus about 10,000 Jianghu mercenaries. However, the entire population of Hanoi City was over 200,000. In comparison, a ratio of 20-1 was more than enough. However, under the enemy's preparations, this number was obviously not enough. At least, it gave Fan Yuhai and the general of the Lan Song Kingdom, Sai Shi, such a feeling. Sai Shi was one of the most powerful generals in the Lan Song Kingdom. Most of the soldiers under him were from the Dragon tribe. This time, under the king's orders, he brought 50,000 men to deal a fatal blow to Hanoi City. Long before they had made their move on Hanoi City, they had already taken down the important city of Go Chi City in the northwest of Vietnam. There were only 500 Vietnamese mercenaries defending it, and it wasn't even an effective defense. Thus, it was easily taken down by Fan Yuhai and Cici. Of course, this was also because Vietnam had just been established, and the centralization of power was not yet complete. After taking down Go Chi City, General Sai Shi led the 70,000 soldiers towards Hanoi City. Fan Yuhai brought the remaining 60,000 soldiers to attack the other cities in Vietnam. From this point, it could be seen that he had big plans. Furthermore, he intended to hand over Hanoi City to the Lan Song Kingdom, which showed his high intelligence. Sai Shi could also feel that Fan Yuhai was a little clever. However, the temptation of Hanoi City was too great. Thinking about the mountain of goods in the commercial street, and the Yang family bank, who knew how much gold and silver were stored there. If he could take over Hanoi City, the Lan Song Kingdom would have more capital to develop. With such an excited thought, Sai Shi led his men to surround Hanoi City. Then, he prepared to knock on the city's west gate with his spies that night. Song Zhe was the person in charge of Vietnam that Yang Chendong had left behind. Recently, he was so busy that he could only sleep for 4 to 6 hours at night. However, he really liked this kind of work pressure. Just like what the 6th young master always said, if you don't work hard when you are young, if you don't fight hard, do you have to wait until you are old to regret it? Now that he had such a direction to strive for, of course, he wanted to put on a show for others to see. In addition to being able to prove his value, he believed that if he did things well, the 6th young master would definitely take note of it. In the future, there would definitely be a higher position waiting for him in the entire Yang family. Although the work was busy, after more than 2 months of tempering, many things had begun to gradually get on the right track. He had a better understanding of the situation here, and when he did things, it was much easier. Reporting to the governor, the Security Bureau's Gao Yu requests an audience. A person in charge of his safety said outside the office. Song Zhe, who had been appointed as the governor of Vietnam, suddenly heard that someone from the Security Bureau had come. He couldn't help but frown. His intuition told him that when these people appeared, it would not be good news. But he still nodded and said, "Invite Leader Gao in." Gao Yu, one of the elite agents of the Security Bureau, was also a person that the current deputy director, Yang San, valued very much. This time, he was sent to Vietnam to be in charge of the intelligence work here. Gao Yu strode into the office and gave Xianxia a military salute.
Although the two sides did not have a direct relationship, as the person in charge of Vietnam appointed by the sixth young master, he must give the corresponding respect.
You don't have to be so polite, Director Gao, please take a seat. Xianxia also returned the salute and said politely with a smile. Gao Yu, on the other hand, did not have the slightest smile on his face. Instead, he answered very seriously, Governor Song, we have lost contact with Goyong City. Goyong City? Hearing this, Xianxia's face flashed with surprise. He was very clear about the situation in Vietnam during this period of time.
He was very familiar with the location of the city and what kind of role it played.
However, out of caution, he still asked again, did something happen to your people that caused you to be unable to contact them in time?
The transportation in ancient times was not good, so there would be some problems with the transmission of information.
It was very normal to be late for a few days. It was no wonder that Xianxia thought in this direction. Gao Yu, on the other hand, shook his head with certainty. That won't happen. When we send messages, we use 2 people and 2 lines. They don't overlap. Even if something happens to one of them, the other will definitely bring the news over. But now, it is the designated time, and there is still no news. I suspect. When Gao Yu said the words I suspect, his expression was obviously more serious. However, he paused for less than 2 seconds before he resolutely said his guess. I suspect that either something happened to them, or Goyong City has gone out of control and they can't leave the city. Out of control? Can't leave the city? This conclusion was a little scary, and even Xianxia had to treat it with caution. Are you sure, Leader Gao? You should know the possible consequences of this conclusion. I'm sure. Gao Yu's answer was very straightforward. In fact, he dared to say this because he had already waited for an extra day. In other words, after 24 hours, there was still no news about Goyong City. That was why he came to look for Xianxia. According to the internal regulations of the Security Bureau, he had already gone a little overboard. However, there was no other way. This matter involved too many people, so he had to be very careful. That was why he had waited for an extra day. Hearing Gao Yu's affirmation, Xianxia's expression turned even uglier. He strode over to the map of Vietnam hanging on the wall. His gaze paused on Go-Ming City for a moment before he punched it. Do they really have the guts to do this? Needless to say, Gao Yu, who was standing behind him, naturally knew who he was referring to. This result was exactly the same as his previous analysis. He was also somewhat unable to accept it, but what was coming was unavoidable. Chapter 562. Bang bang bang. While Gao Yu was still accepting this fact in his heart, a few gunshots suddenly rang out in the dark night outside. What's going on? Xianxia and Gao Yu shouted at the same time. Governor, the gunshots are coming from the west gate. It seems like it's coming from the city. Lang Feng, who was guarding the door, had good eyesight.
When the gunshots were heard, he ran out to the street and found the source of the gunshots with his keen eyesight and judgment.
The gunshots were getting louder and louder, showing no signs of slowing down. Xianxia and Gao Yu looked at each other and knew that the worst situation had come. Leader Gao, judging from the gunshots, there are a lot of enemies. We need to prepare for the worst. Xianxia quickly calmed down. There was nothing to be afraid of. I understand. I will immediately bring the radio box here and contact the outside. How could Gao Yu not know how critical the situation was right now? Since the enemy had chosen to make a move on their mercenaries, the other 3 city gates must have been sealed off as well. It would be impossible to rely on people to ask for help from outside. Thank you, Leader Gao. Xianxia nodded seriously. Only a few people knew about the existence of a radio station in Hanoi City. It was one of the secret weapons that Yang Chendong had prepared for them before he left. Because there was no electricity in the city, in order to prevent the radio from running out of battery, Yang Chendong had specifically ordered that it should not be used unless it was a major incident. Even if they wanted to use it, they needed to get the approval of both the governor and the Security Bureau. It seemed that now was the critical moment to use it. Gao Yu turned and left the office. Xianxia hesitated for a moment and then said to Lang Feng, Go and get platoon leader Lu and General Hong Jin. Not long after, the platoon leader of the Lang Feng platoon, Lu Jian, and the Vietnamese mercenary general, Hong Jin, appeared in the governor's office. When they arrived, they saw Xianxia and another man busily working on something. Knowing that the two had arrived, Xianxia walked out of the office and looked at Hong Jin. "What's the situation outside?" Reporting to Governor Song, after the west gate was breached, the south gate was also lost. "Our troops are currently fighting with the enemy while retreating into the city. There are too many enemies, and it's dark. We're not prepared." Hong Jin lowered his head as he spoke, his face full of guilt. Of the three generals of the Vietnamese mercenaries, Nguyen Chunqing and Chen Di were not in the city, so he was in charge of commanding the Vietnamese mercenaries. Under his efforts, the 4 city gates that were originally guarded by the auxiliary barracks were now handed over to them. This trust made him extremely touched. Just as he was thinking of performing well, who would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear? In addition, there were actually traitors among his soldiers. This caught him off guard and caused him to lose 2 city gates in a row. Hong Jin wanted to die. The city had been breached, and he was the person in charge. How could he still be trusted and used by the mercenaries? Seeing Hong Jin's grievance and self-blame, Xianxia sighed. He was angry at Hong Jin's uselessness, but what was the use of scolding him now? It would only make the morale of the troops more unstable. Once Hong Jin was pushed into the enemy's camp, it would only help the enemy's strength. All right, this governor knows about this matter. Let's think about how to take the blame and defend the city first. How about this? You immediately bring your men to stop the enemy from entering the city. You don't have to force them out, but you have to at least slow them down. Do you understand? He was not scolded, and his military power was not taken away. Instead, he was given a chance to take the blame. Hong Jin was touched, and his body tensed up as he said, "Governor, please rest assured. As long as I, Hong Jin, am still breathing, I will not let them get here so quickly." "Good, if you can defend until dawn, I'll give you a merit." Xianxia nodded, and patted Hong Jin's shoulder confidently. He had a look that said, "I believe in you, go ahead and do it." The so-called defense until dawn meant that they had to defend the business district and not be attacked before dawn. This was because the provincial office, the Yang family's bank, and the most profitable shops were all gathered in this area. As long as there were no problems here, even if Hanoi City was surrounded, the loss would not be too great. Hong Jin went out with a solemn expression, leaving the platoon leader of the Lang Front platoon, Lu Jian. He started as an auxiliary soldier, step by step until today. He had also been tested for loyalty. Now, Lu Jian had completely grown up. His body stood there like a javelin, like a sharp sword that could be unsheathed at any time, giving off a cold, murderous aura. "Platoon leader Lu, gather our soldiers and ask them to retreat. After that, go to the top floor of the watchtower. I'll wait for you." Xianxia did not need to be too courteous to Lu Jian, who was completely trustworthy. He also did not need to motivate him. He only needed to give the order. "Yes." After a standard military salute, Lu Jian turned and left. Xianxia stood there and could not help but sigh. "Looks like I have to use my last resort." The so-called last resort was the top floor of the watchtower. This was another insurance that Yang Chendong left for Xianxia before he left. The watchtower was similar to the watchtowers during the anti-Japanese war. It was temporarily built with cement after Yang Chendong led the army to occupy Hanoi City. It was for the sake of better monitoring the surrounding environment and safety. However, others did not know that there were two 12.7mm heavy machine guns on the top floor of the watchtowers at the east and west ends of the business district. The full name was QJZ 8912. 7mm heavy machine gun. Theoretical firing rate: 450 to 600 rounds/minute. Effective range: 1,500 meters. It was a killing machine that the 6th young master left for Xianxia. Unless Erebus had poor vision, otherwise, once this machine gun was fired, no matter how many enemies came, they would only be courting death. This was the reason why Xianxia insisted that Hong Jin block the enemies outside until dawn. At this time, some people might ask, why not use artillery to attack? Xianxia quickly gave up on the idea. They were in the city, and if they used the cannons, they would inevitably hurt the civilians. These people had just become citizens of Vietnam, and they did not have a complete sense of belonging. Once the cannons were fired, the entire city would explode, and he would have to clean up the mess. More importantly, due to the destructive power of the artillery, there were only 2 of them in the unstable Vietnam region. Furthermore, there were not many shells, and they were mainly used to intimidate the enemy. If they were really used to kill the enemy, the scale was far from enough. The heavy machine gun was different. It could control its killing range and effectively kill the enemy within a certain distance. It was definitely a powerful weapon. Unfortunately, the ammunition for the machine gun could not be produced by the factory in Cheng City, so there were not many bullets. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, Xianxia would not use this machine gun. Just as the battle cries from the west and south were incessant, a radio wave had already passed through the city and flew into the distance. On the surface, it seemed that the entire Hanoi city had been surrounded, and not a single person had escaped. However, the news had already spread far and wide. This was a radio station that should have appeared in the 18th century. It should be the 2nd year after the invention of electricity. Because of the arrival of Yang Chendong, it was already used by the mercenaries. This was not only a secret, even if it was announced, not many people would understand it. The news was transmitted over and over again, and it had already been repeated 4 times. Gao Yu, who was in charge of controlling the radio station, could not help but break out in cold sweat. Although he had learned how to operate this thing, this was the first time he had used it alone. Could anyone really accept it? He couldn't help but be worried. What if the other party didn't turn it on because they wanted to save power? Wouldn't his call be useless? Worse still, after a long period of use, who knew when the radio station would run out of power? If that happened, it would be no different from a piece of junk. Gao Yu was very nervous. He could not help but break out in cold sweat. He kept praying in his heart, "Hurry up and receive it. Hurry up and receive it." At this moment, a fleet was sailing on the sea from the direction of Ryukyu Island towards Yunnan province. The ship was moving at a moderate speed to avoid accidentally bumping into any huge rocks in the shallows. Although it was impossible under normal circumstances, considering that the 6th young master was in the fleet, they absolutely could not allow any accidents to happen. Therefore, the crew was especially careful. Compared to the careful and cautious Navy crew, the more than 10,000 mercenaries on the ship were much more relaxed. Some of them had already gone to sleep, and some of them were sitting together playing poker or chess. When there was no war, they could relax appropriately. This was a combination of work and rest, and Yang Chendong had given special permission. Therefore, although it was late at night, there were still many soldiers who had not gone to sleep. Wang Shan was one of them. Originally, he was in charge of the radio station tonight. Compared with other radio stations, the one with Yang Chendong was on 24 hours a day. As for the problem of power supply, don't be ridiculous. With the 6th young master there, would the battery still be a problem? Because of his excellent performance in the radio training class, and because Wang Shan himself was very clever, he was chosen by Yang Chendong to be a telegraph correspondent. But when the radio station rarely transmitted any news, Wang Shan slowly stopped guarding it even when he was sleeping like before. Just like just now, when he played Do Di Zhu with his comrades for a while, he did not guard the radio station. Chapter 563.
But in less than half an hour, after a few rounds, he handed the cards to his comrade beside him and returned to the computer room.
He instinctively glanced at the telegraph machine. First, he pushed the door open and took a look. Then, he turned around and wanted to go back to continue playing cards. But then his body froze. He pulled the door open and saw the telegraph machine flashing with a red light. Wasn't that the signal of a telegram coming in? Whoosh! He sat in front of the telegraph machine and put on his headphones to receive the message.
After a while, he quickly left the place and rushed to the place where the 6th young master was resting.
Needless to say, the place where Yang Chendong was resting was guarded. But when the guards saw that it was Wang Shan, no one stopped him.
This was an order from the 6th young master. Unless he was with the ladies and needed to be informed in advance, this person had the privilege of seeing him at any time.
Wang Shan also didn't sleep. He was playing Fight the Landlord with Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. With Yang Chendong's current status, even if he wanted to have some fun, it was not something that could be done by just anyone. After playing with the regiment commander and battalion commander a few times, he found that they were very restrained. He gave up and replaced them with the people around him. Sure enough, Tiger's Mane, who was very familiar with him, and Beta Persei, who was careless, were not too afraid of him. At least everyone won and lost, which was more interesting.
Sixth young master. Wang Shan has an urgent matter to see you. The voice of the first guard captain Qiu Vi, who was in charge of security outside the door, suddenly sounded from the other side of the door. Wang Shan, let him in.
Yang Qindong thought that something big must have happened. He turned over and got out of bed. Just as he stood there, Wang Shan had already walked in with an anxious face. Sixth young master, a telegram from Hanoi City. Yang Qindong reached out and took the telegram. There were not many words in the telegram, but it was enough to explain everything. Well, someone actually dared to have designs on Hanoi City. They must have eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts. Just as Yang Qindong frowned, Wang Shan, who was standing in front of him, lowered his head and said with a flushed face, "Sixth young master, I was absent just now. I didn't receive the telegram immediately. Please punish me." Yang Qindong raised his eyebrows.
He could actually understand the other party.
After all, the telegraph might not even ring once in half a year. Who would keep an eye on it all the time?
However, since Wang Shan had already said so, if he did not punish him, he was afraid that he would be even more uneasy.
Therefore he pointed at him and said, "How about this? Since this is your first offense, you will be fined 1 month's salary. In addition, immediately send a telegram back to Hanoi, saying that we already know about this matter. Tell them to hold on and we will be there soon." Hearing that it was only a month's salary penalty, Wang Shan's face was full of gratitude. He thought that this time he would definitely lose his job. Who would have thought that it would be over so easily? However, the sixth young master also said that this was the first offense, so the punishment was light. At that moment, he decided that the same mistake could not be made a second time. He nodded his head and went out to send the telegram. It seems that it is necessary to arrange an assistant for Wang Shan. Yang Qindong thought thoughtfully. Wang Shan's ability was still very strong, especially when he was very familiar with the code. He could translate the telegram in the shortest time possible. He would not let go of such a talent. Of course, this was only a small matter. How to rescue Hanoi City was the most important thing.
Tiger's Mane. Inform the officers of the 2nd Regiment, 3rd Regiment and above to come for a meeting.
In the inner room of the governor's office in Hanoi City, there was an excited shout. "There's a reply, there's a reply." Xianxia, who was looking at the map of Hanoi City in the outer room, heard such a shout and quickly stepped into the inner room. Who replied to the telegram? What did they say?
"It's the 6th young master, the 6th young master.
He told us to hold on and support us soon." With a face full of excitement, there was a reason to be excited. That was the telegram from the 6th young master. At this moment, Xianxia's face was full of relief. Since the message had been sent out, as long as he held on for a week, the reinforcements would definitely come and their crisis would be resolved. Thinking of this, he looked at the transmitter that was already turned off but still had a little bit of warmth. He could not help but show a very envious look. It's good to have such a thing. The matter of sending out the message had been dealt with. The sound of Lu Jian's footsteps could be heard from outside. He had already arranged everything. 2 auxiliary battalions and 6 temporary auxiliary battalions, a total of more than 2,000 people, had retreated to the commercial street that was only about 5 miles away. They were also arranged in various places. If the enemy really broke through the watchtowers, they would be able to take action. It would not be a problem to take care of a few fish that escaped the net. After the matter was settled, Lu Jian came to the office and waited for Xianxia's orders. "You came at the right time. Bring the cold front platoon and follow me to the watchtower." After seeing Lu Jian, Xianxia nodded confidently. After all, with external help there was hope. All he needed to do was to hold on. The platoon of Cold Front Platoon followed behind Governor Xianxia and arrived at the watchtower on the north side of the road. When the key to the door was unlocked and everything in the room was reflected in front of the Cold Front Platoon, there was a series of gasps. To be able to become a member of the elite Cold Front Platoon, one could be considered to have seen a lot. But everything in front of them still gave them a strong visual shock. It was not because of anything else, but because of the heavy metal weapons placed there. Needless to say, there were a total of 10 Type 95 machine guns. In other words, Every 3 Cold Front platoon members could have one. In the past, a full company would only be equipped with one high-end weapon. To say that the Type 95 machine gun was high-end was undoubtedly a bit of a slap in the face. Looking at the heavy
12.7mm machine gun on the ground, just the body of the gun and the square buttstock gave off a very imposing feeling.
In addition to the golden bullets neatly placed at the side, its lethality was not small. Well, all of this had exceeded the Cold Front platoon's expectations. They could not wait to rush up and play with it and show off their skills. 10 squad machine guns, 2 12.7mm
machine guns over here and 2 over there.
They are all yours now. Platoon leader Lu will be responsible for distributing them. I only have one request, and that is to not let the enemy rush into the business district.
I'm not afraid to tell everyone that what happened here has already been reported to the 6th young master.
It won't be long before our reinforcements arrive. Let me ask you, can you hold on? Xianxia was almost shouting. At this moment, he was betting everything on this platoon of Cold Front platoon members. Yes. Including Lu Jian, the 31 Cold Front platoon members replied excitedly. Some of their faces were even flushed. They were already looking forward to their next performance.
As long as they performed well and waited for the 6th young master to arrive, how could they be afraid that others would not know of their contributions?
Good, since that's the case, everyone go prepare yourselves. I'm afraid that the enemy will appear at dawn. Take the time to rest and eat. Xianxia waved his hand. He did not say much about the following matters. He believed that the Cold Front platoon members should know what to do before the battle. They had to guard the 2 towers in the north and south for God knows how many days. Not only did they have to eat and rest, they even had to think about how to relieve themselves. Hanoi City West Gate. General Sai Shi had already led the army into Hanoi City. With the cooperation from both inside and outside, it was almost effortless to enter the city. The only regret was that when they entered the city, they encountered the patrolling mercenaries on the streets.
The 2 sides had a short encounter, which alarmed the mercenaries in the city.
When they wanted to take a step forward, the resistance became stronger. If they were discovered, then so be it. Initially, Sexy did not expect to be able to sneak into the city.
After all, they had the advantage in numbers.
Furthermore, they were in Hanoi City.
Many of the citizens here had already submitted to the mercenaries.
Sexy did not believe that they would still use those powerful cannons to kill them. If that was the case, many civilians would die. This would undoubtedly affect their newly built reputation. Presumably, this was not something that the enemy wanted to see. It was because of this mentality that the army was able to enter Hanoi City without fear. Reality proved that they had guessed correctly. The cannons did not sound at all. Without the suppression of the cannons, the Lansong army was like an arrow piercing through Hanoi City. In a short period of time, they even managed to break through the south gate.
It was at this time that they were met with a strong resistance, and their opponents were the Vietnamese mercenaries led by General Hong Jin.
Hong Jin had already lost the city. Now, he was commanding the battle with the mentality of redeeming himself. In order to complete Xianxia's order to defend the city until dawn, he was going all out.
Not only did he send out all the mercenaries in his hands, he even sent out the 500 elite guards that he had imitated Cold Front platoon.
In short, he was determined to complete Xianxia's orders at all costs. Under the orders of death, the Vietnamese mercenaries fought against their superior numbers. Cruel cold weapons battles took place in the streets and alleys. Knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, forks, sticks, arrows, shields, anything that could be used, anything that could be imagined, was brought out. Often, when 2 soldiers were fighting, one would slash at the other's body, while the other would stab at the other's abdomen. Fresh blood flowed out, and it was common for both sides to perish together. The moment the Vietnamese mercenaries showed signs of weakness due to their numbers, Hong Jin's 500 elite guards were sent out. They were all wielding thick steel knives, with deep blood grooves on them. Once such a weapon slashed someone, the wound would bleed non-stop and splatter in all directions. Chapter 564. Time and time again, the number of his personal guards decreased. However, they were able to turn the tide of the battle and push back the Allied forces. Even Hong Jin himself had charged onto the battlefield several times. With a long sword in his hand, He chopped off the heads of at least 7 enemies. His body was covered in blood and he looked like a god of death. Starting from the city gate and extending all the way to the center of Hanoi City, the streets were filled with corpses of soldiers and injured people. The blood that flowed out from their bodies gathered together to form a river of blood. It was dark red and looked terrifying. It was because of Hong Jin's valiant resistance that the enemy's attack speed was greatly reduced.
When he saw that it was time, he led less than 4,000 soldiers to the busiest part of the city.
It was also the commercial street where the Jianghu Palace was originally located. After the battle, only 4,000 out of 10,000 returned. More than half of the men were left outside. Perhaps there were some soldiers who ran away or were heavily injured. However, 60% of their strength was lost just like that. It was enough to see how intense the battle was. Under the fierce attack of Saishi's army, Hong Jin, who only had 10,000 men, was forced to retreat. However, the sky was already turning bright. After defeating Hong Jin, Saishi's confidence was greatly boosted. He personally led the allied forces and waved the flag of the Lansong Kingdom and Jiaoji. He beat the war drums and shouted as he charged towards the commercial street. Looking from afar, the streets were filled with soldiers and soldiers. Right in front of them was the busiest commercial street in Hanoi City. It was also the most valuable commercial street in their eyes. It was said that every shop there had goods that could attract merchants from other countries. It was said that there was a young family bank there and the money inside was already piled up like a mountain. Let the brothers rest for a while and eat. Let's try to take this place in one battle. Saishi couldn't help but lick his lips and reveal a cruel smile. He said this to the captains beside him.
General is mighty.
The captains flattered from time to time.
Although they lost 7,000 to 8,000 men in the battle last night, it was only a tenth of their 70,000 men. When they heard that there were only 6,000 to 7,000 mercenaries left, how could they still put them in their eyes? They even couldn't help but think that perhaps they could occupy the place with a single charge. At that time, wouldn't the gold and silver be at their disposal? The Allied forces temporarily stopped their attack, and using this opportunity, Hong Jin took 4,000 soldiers and retreated into the commercial street. Almost all of them were covered in blood. They had used their strength to win the respect of the mercenaries. Send the prepared breakfast to them and let them have a good rest. Xianxia, who was standing on the watchtower, couldn't help but nod silently. He was satisfied with Hong Jin's performance this time. He believed that after this incident, the combat strength of these 4,000 people would rise to another level. Fortunately, although the commercial street was only 3 miles long, it was wide enough. Moreover, it was connected to the square of the palace, so there was enough space for these soldiers to refurbish. Now that the battle had reached this point, it was time for the real mercenaries to show their might. At 8 o'clock in the morning, when Songzhi's watch pointed to this location, the Lansong Kingdom's army finally made their move. They knew where their advantage was, so when they made their move, they pushed forward from both the north and south sides of the commercial street. The soldiers of the Allied forces, who were wearing battle suits, used their shields to open the way. They tried their best to hide behind the shields, and began to move forward with heavy footsteps. Looking down from the watchtower, it gave off a feeling that a storm was coming. The workers of the Xianxia shops in the commercial street had all retreated to the palace, leaving behind only the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. They were either holding Type 81 rifles in their hands or holding bows and arrows in their hands, panting heavily. However, without exception, everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and hot-bloodedness. They were all troops that had experienced the Battle of Jiaoji, and winning with a small number was a common occurrence in their eyes. However, when the battle intent approached, they couldn't help but feel excited. Some people's hands were still trembling. After all, this was considered a passive defense, which was rarely seen in the history of the mercenaries. On the north and south towers, there were only 15 cold vanguard soldiers in the first tower. If such a force was placed on the battlefield, it would not even cause a ripple. However, in this place they had undoubtedly become the absolute main force. Right now, countless soldiers on the streets were looking in their direction, treating them as the anchor of the sea, as the wind vane. On the north watchtower, Songzhi slowly lowered the binoculars in front of his chest, and a serious expression appeared on his face. This time, the enemy had clearly come prepared. Not only were there iron shields at the front of the group, but there were also warlords at the back of the group. The purpose of the military commanders was to prevent the soldiers from retreating. From this point, It could be seen that they were prepared to be heavily injured by the muskets.
Needless to say, this kind of enemy was somewhat scary.
At the very least they had the advantage in numbers.
If they were to attack without regard for the consequences, it would be a bloody battle. After all, the number of mercenaries was too small. Only one cold vanguard platoon and 2 auxiliary battalions were armed with guns.
He was a little worried, but when he thought about how the telegram had been sent out, and how the 6th young master should be here with reinforcements, he felt more confident.
So what if they were few in number? Even if he was the only one left, he would fight until his last breath. A gentle breeze blew, bringing a chill to the January morning in Hanoi City. It seemed to be the sound of the war horn. The Allied army began to moving forward from the north and south. The pitch-black iron shields were like a black flood rushing at the front of the troops. Charge! Sexi's voice was like a roar from hell, dragging the pace of the war forward. On the watchtower, the platoon leader of the platoon, Lu Jian, rested his hands on the 12.7mm heavy machine gun.
The muscles on his arms bulged slightly, and his eyes were filled with a strong desire to fight.
His mouth was slightly open, ready to spit out the word attack at any time. Since it was the enemy's first wave of attack, of course, they had to suppress them as much as possible. This was related to the morale of both sides. Even though the enemy was prepared, especially since the black iron shields were proven to be able to block bullets from afar, they had to put in a lot of effort to suppress the enemy's morale. The advantage of the black shields was that they could block bullets, but at the same time, because of their weight, their movements were very slow. 2 long dragons formed by black shields wriggled into the firing range of the 2 towers in the north and south respectively. Now that they were in firing range, the 14 platoons around him all looked at the platoon leader, Lu Jian, as if they were soldiers waiting for the bugle call. Attack! A sonorous and forceful voice came out from Lu Jian's mouth. The
12.7mm heavy machine gun in his hand was like a tongue of flame as it let out heavy metal clanging sounds.
It was like a pianist playing a beautiful piece of music. Bullets poured down from the sky like a torrential downpour. The other 14 members of the Lang Vanguard were also wielding their squad machine guns or Type 95 as they fired at the enemy below. At this moment, they were no longer laughing and joking like they usually were.
Instead, their faces revealed a serious and solemn expression.
Da-da-da. Pa-pa-pa. Following the gunshots from the north watchtower, the south side also responded. Although it was only a platoon of platoons, because they had 4 12.7mm heavy machine guns and 10 Type 95 squad machine guns, their firepower looked very fierce. They didn't look down on them because of their small numbers. The bullets rained down from the sky and struck the black shield, creating bullet holes on the surface of the shield. However, most of the bullets were blocked. Only a few enemies accidentally exposed a part of their body and were unfortunately hit. They fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ha ha ha, did you see that? Our shields can block the enemy's muskets. Now, I order everyone to speed up and charge. General Ceci's laughter came from behind the alliance. Although Fan Yuhai had told him that Jiaoji used the shields to block muskets, he didn't see it with his own eyes, so he wasn't confident. Now that the truth was in front of him, he didn't have to worry anymore. He started to move closer to the military commander and urged the soldiers to charge forward. Bastard! Lu Jian saw through the window of the watchtower that the enemy could block the muskets and couldn't help but stare angrily. He finally knew why the 6th young master wanted them to practice their marksmanship. In the past, when he heard people say that bullets couldn't hit things, he didn't think much of it.
Now that the truth was in front of him, he knew what it meant to be far-sighted.
Change guns, aim and shoot. Once there's a gap, switch to the machine gun and shoot. Lu Jian quickly changed his strategy. As he spoke, he took out his Type 95 and changed it to a single shot. He aimed at an alliance soldier who exposed his knee and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet flew out, creating a dazzling trail of color in the air before it drilled into the knee covered in flesh. Immediately, an enemy with a metal shield knelt on the ground. Before he could stand up, he was trampled to the ground by the advancing soldiers behind him. Soon, he was turned into a pile of meat paste. The platoons learned from their platoon leader and started to shoot. The effect was not bad. One after another, the advancing enemies would be shot and fall to the ground when they exposed a gap. However, there were too many enemies. A platoon of soldiers couldn't stop their advance. Chapter 565. More and more enemies walked past the 600-meter perimeter and began to enter the commercial street. The auxiliary soldiers who were lying in ambush on both sides of the street and in the shops began to fire. Because of the close distance, the grenades in their hands finally had room to be used. Once they threw the grenades into the crowd, it was as if a small earthquake had occurred. After that, a dozen or so enemies were blown to the ground. Speed up! Seeing that the vanguard army's losses were increasing, Sari rubbed his teeth and showed a pained expression. He ordered the troops to speed up the attack. As long as they rushed into the commercial street and obtained the qualifications to engage in close combat, their advantage in numbers would be maximized. The sound of gunfire continued. The archers of the 6 temporary auxiliary battalions also began to shoot arrows, trying their best to kill the enemies that rushed in. But because there were too many enemies, and with a military supervisor behind them, it was like the waves of the sea. More and more enemies rushed in. Not only that, but the enemy's archers also began to counterattack at close range. The auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers began to suffer casualties. On the watchtower, Lu Jian watched all of this with a pair of blood-red eyes. Seeing that more and more enemies were appearing, he stretched out his hand and said, "Bring me the rocket launcher." He didn't use it before because the enemy was protected by iron shields, so the attack power would inevitably be reduced. Secondly, the distance was too far, so the power of the rocket launcher couldn't be maximized. But now that the enemy was right under his nose, he didn't have to think about these problems anymore. A 1-meter-long rocket launcher was handed to Lu Jian by a cold warrior. He carried it on his shoulder. Before firing, he said to the soldiers, "The opportunity is coming. You must seize it and make a beautiful counterattack." Yes. More than a dozen soldiers agreed without hesitation. Then, they adjusted their guns to burst mode and waited for an opportunity to appear. Lu Jian aimed at the target. Then, a flame rushed out from his shoulder. The powerful recoil made Lu Jian's body tremble. Then, the flame rushed straight into the enemy camp. After flying for about 100 meters, it hit an iron shield and exploded. The powerful flames and shockwaves were even more powerful than 10 grenades thrown together. Under the powerful force, many of the metal shields were blown away, revealing the bodies of the enemy hiding below. Fight! The dozen or so cold vanguard warriors, who had been waiting for an opportunity, fired their guns in unison. It was like a net of fire that enveloped the enemies below. Just this wave of attacks alone had killed or injured at least a few hundred enemies. Because of this, the enemy's attack had slowed down. The auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers in the commercial street could not help but feel the pressure on them lessen. They took advantage of this opportunity to eliminate the enemies that had rushed in. "Don't retreat. Keep going. If you retreat, you'll be killed." Seeing that the first wave of attacks was about to be stopped, the commanding general, Cici, naturally had a look of unwillingness on his face. He yelled and screamed, and even killed a few soldiers who wanted to retreat. Only then did he stop the army from losing. Under the pressure of the inspectors, the Allied forces launched a new round of attacks. The mercenaries who had the chance to take a breather threw their energy back into the battlefield. Battle cries rang out one after another. It was as if at every moment, every breath and every second, there were corpses falling down. Blood was flowing, and lives were flowing away. 9 true commanderies no weave cities dock. Several fast boats were docking here. Countless soldiers in camouflage clothes were walking to the shore from the boats. They were the soldiers of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard Army's 1st Division. After receiving the telegram from Hanoi City, Yang Qindong ordered the ships to speed up overnight. By noon of the 2nd day, they had already boarded a fast boat and arrived at the No Regimental Pier. Together with the 3 battalions of the 3rd Regiment, more than 1,300 soldiers, they completed the landing. 9 true commandery was already in the hands of the mercenaries, so the landing was naturally very smooth. When Yang Qindong also got off the boat and came to land, he raised his hand and looked at the military watch on his wrist. The time was 11:30 in the afternoon. "Hurry up and get off the boat, push the bicycle out, and hurry to Hanoi City," Yang Qindong said to Beta Persei, who was following him. Next, it was up to this loud voice to inform the whole regiment. Coincidentally, Yang Chendong was preparing to escort the newly produced goods from Crimson City to Hanoi City when the news of the battle came from there. Since this was the case, of course, he would not be polite. Since someone wanted to attack him, then the best way was to fight back with 10 times the strength. More than 1,000 bicycles were unloaded from the ship. Yang Chendong hopped onto one of the bicycles and rode straight to Hanoi City. The speed of a bicycle was generally about 20 kilometers per hour. If it was a young person riding it, the speed would be even faster. It was common for them to reach 30 kilometers per hour. Compared to the average speed of a warhorse, which was 12.5 kilometers per hour, it was still a bit faster. More than 1,000 people each rode a bicycle. After carrying guns and ammunition, they majestically went from Noeave City to Hanoi City. It was only a straight line distance of more than 800 li. They were confident that they could reach their destination in a little more than a day. At that time, they would be like divine soldiers descending from the sky and fiercely stabbing the enemy's back. In front of a commercial street in Hanoi City, although the sky was gradually getting dark, the flames of war still continued. From the morning until now, the battle had lasted for more than 10 hours. The streets were already filled with corpses, but the coalition forces still had no intention of stopping. Obviously, they wanted to take down this place in one go and did not want to give the mercenaries a chance to breathe. After more than 10 hours, the firepower of the mercenaries was not as fierce as before. Many of the auxiliary soldiers guarding the shops had their guns burned, so they had no choice but to put down their bayonets and give up their advantage of long-range combat to choose close combat. On the watchtower, the 30 soldiers of the cold front were already exhausted. When they had to continuously shoot from morning to night, it was actually a kind of torture and a test of physical strength and willpower. Quickly take a break. Come and drink some hot soup. The provincial governor, Xianxia, led a few young men into the watchtower and brought out the hot soup that had just been prepared. The moment the aroma wafted out, the throats of several soldiers could not help but squirm. Some of them even had their stomachs growling. From morning till now, they didn't even have the time to drink water, let alone eat anything. Now that the food was served, all of them instantly felt their stomachs rumbling with hunger. Lu Jian did not hesitate and quickly drank a bowl of soup. Although this kind of soup was not as filling as some staple foods, it was easy to digest and provided calories quickly. It was the most suitable food at the moment. After gulping down a mouthful of hot soup, Lu Jian breathed out a mouthful of hot air and then asked with concern, "Governor Song, do the soldiers below have food?" "Yes, they all have food. Don't worry," Xianxia said enthusiastically, then took the initiative to walk to a 12.7 mm heavy machine gun. He looked at the enemies below who were still charging and fired a magazine of bullets. The effect wasn't very good. Most of them hit the iron shields that were raised high, but it still caused a number of injuries to the enemy. Below. What are the casualties of the soldiers below? After finishing the bowl of soup, Lu Jian picked up a Type 95 class machine gun and fired a row of bullets under the moonlight. Then, his gaze fell on Xianxia's body. Xianxia was busy reloading the 12.7 mm heavy machine gun. He did not even raise his head as he replied, "The situation is not good. In one day, more than 400 of our brothers were sacrificed and more than 300 were injured." Just from the fact that the number of casualties was more than the number of injuries, it could be seen that the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers were really fighting with their lives on the line. It could be imagined that most of the injured brothers would not be able to fight anymore. Otherwise, even if they were to die on the battlefield, they would not retreat because of their injuries. There were a total of 8 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. In just one day, the casualties reached a quarter of them. From this, it could be seen how fierce and cruel the battle was. Even though Lu Jian was already mentally prepared, when he heard this answer, he could not help but be stunned. Then he suddenly stomped his feet. These Lansong people should be stabbed 1,000 times. When the 6th young master arrives, we must teach them a lesson. That's right. Not only must we teach them a lesson, we must also destroy their country like we did to Jiaoji. Xianxia said hatefully. Originally, the situation in Yunnan province was getting better day by day, especially in Hanoi City. If it continued to develop like this, it would not be long before it became a bustling city. But in this battle, who knows how many things were destroyed? It would take at least 2 to 3 months to recover. Seeing his political achievements being destroyed like this, as the highest-ranking officer here, Xianxia's anger was obviously bigger than anyone else. But it was too early to say these things.
They must first hold on until the sixth young master arrived with reinforcements.
Once this place was attacked by the enemy, they would only die. Then wouldn't it be unnecessary to talk about the future? Governor Song, how long will it take for the sixth young master's reinforcements to arrive? Lu Jian changed the question. The soldiers who were firing at the side could not help but stop their actions at this moment. It was obvious that they were also concerned about this matter. Xianxia did not know that Yang Chendong received the telegram on the ship, nor did he know about the appearance of the bicycle. His expression turned ugly. I estimate that the sixth young master will arrive with reinforcements in about 10 days. Previously, he said about 7 days to stabilize the morale of the soldiers. But now that he was facing the most elite soldiers of the cold front, there was no need to hide anything. In fact, he had to be honest and let them prepare for a long battle. Chapter 566. 10 days. Lu Jian took a deep breath when he heard the answer. He knew that 10 days of reinforcements was the best they could hope for. However, as the platoon leader and the only officer here, he forced a smile on his face. It's only 10 days, no problem. We can definitely hold on because we are the most elite cold vanguard. Yes, it's only 10 days. We can definitely hold on. The soldiers were also filled with confidence because of the platoon leader's aura. Only Xianxia, who was still reloading, had a red face. Would the sixth young master really be able to bring reinforcements in 10 days? On the other side of the commercial street, General Cici was also sitting on a large chair prepared for him by his personal guards. The casualty statistics had just been sent in. In just 1 day of attacks, the number of casualties had reached 13,000. When he saw the results, he couldn't believe it.
If he were to continue fighting like this, wouldn't his 70,000 soldiers only be able to hold on for 5 to 6 days before they would all be buried here?
Of course, this wasn't correct. After all, it was the first day of attacks. The enemy's muskets could unleash their full power. If he continued to attack with fatigue, even if his body was made of iron, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Needless to say, muskets required bullets. If they continued to shoot, would the enemy have enough bullets? Since they had already come this far, there was no reason to retreat now. If they did, all their previous efforts would be wasted.
Ceci forced himself to calm down and said to the captains beside him, "Pass down the order.
Send a small group of soldiers to continue the harassment strategy. The rest of the soldiers should take advantage of the time to rest. When the sun rises tomorrow, we will attack again. No matter what, we must take down this place by tomorrow morning." It was only a commercial street 3 miles away. Ceci was already prepared to cover the ground with corpses. He didn't believe that they wouldn't be able to take down this place by then. He had an absolute advantage in numbers. His soldiers could get a good rest. Even if he had to exhaust them, he would exhaust the 3,000 mercenaries to death. That night, gunshots were constantly heard. In such an environment, it was naturally difficult for the mercenaries to get a good rest, especially when the enemy would suddenly launch an attack when they wanted to rest. There were 2 times when the enemy almost rushed in. At dawn the next day, the enemy launched another fierce attack. 10,000 men and horses were gathered on both the north and south roads. It looked like they were going to charge into the business district at once. In order to deal with such a huge attack, the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers sacrificed another 500 men to stabilize the situation. When the battle once again reached the night of the same day, almost all of the original 8 battalions were injured, and only 3 battalions were still able to fight. Even the Cold Vanguard platoon on the watchtower lost 3 soldiers. They were all injured by stray arrows. After all, when 100 arrows were fired at the same time, there would always be a few that would enter the watchtower through the window. Even platoon leader Lu Jian's left arm was hit by an arrow.
The bodies of the 3 fallen comrades were carried to the side, leaving the other Cold Vanguard soldiers with endless fighting spirit instead of sorrow.
They were all prepared to die for a noble cause. That night, when Xianxia came to deliver dinner, they all wrote their wills. After all, they did not know when the reinforcements would arrive. Looking at the current situation, not to mention 10 days, they might not even be able to defend for a day or 2. Don't worry, I will arrange for these wills to be kept safe. They will definitely be delivered to the 6th young master. If you die in battle, it will not be in vain. Your families will be taken care of by us, and your revenge will be taken by us. Xianxia kept the wills in his arms as he spoke with tears in his eyes. After a day of attack, the Allied forces also suffered heavy losses. Another 10,000 men were lost. Fortunately, they could see that the mercenaries were at the end of their rope. Cici began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. At that time, he would launch the final attack. By tomorrow at this time, they would definitely be able to take down the business district and occupy the entire Hanei city. They would be able to announce their victory to the world. The torrent of bicycles continued to move forward in the darkness. Every bicycle had a glowing flashlight tied to the front. At this moment, they were under the leadership of Yang Chendong and were rushing towards Hanei city. The ones riding at the front were Yang Chendong and his men. The 6th young master, who was usually calm and collected, did not say a word at this moment. He focused all his strength on his legs. Fortunately, the quality of these bicycles was very good. Every one of them was man-made. Every small part was polished many times before being used. They would definitely not drop the chain at a critical moment. Once one learned how to ride such a thing, one could control it with one hand. They even ate while riding. Other than 2 hours of rest and 15 minutes for toilet breaks and recovery, they were basically always on the road. Knowing that the situation in Hanei city would not be good, under the leadership of Yang Chendong, a group of cold warriors rode from noon yesterday to the next day. They rode for more than 800 miles in 30 hours. Excluding the time for rest and sleep, their average speed was more than 25 kilometers per hour. Finally, they arrived at the outskirts of Hanei city in the middle of the night. It was here that they could see flashes of fire from time to time from afar. Needless to say, that must be the center of the battlefield. Young master, let's do it. Tiger's Mane's eyes were fixed on the city. His fists were clenched tightly. It was obvious that he was furious at the moment. The 2nd Regiment's cold vanguard warriors were also quickly gathering. The various battalions, companies, and platoons were checking their numbers and equipment. Although they were tired from the journey, they were still prepared to fight as soon as the order was given. Yang Chendong, whose eyes were shining from time to time, nodded. The earlier they entered the city, the less pressure Xianxia and the others would face. However, the choice of how to attack the city was also very important. Although attacking now was indeed unexpected, he did not want to scare the enemy away. He wanted all of them to stay here. Therefore, he needed to plan carefully. Direct company, stay behind. The rest of the soldiers should take the time to rest. 3rd Commander Wuxia strode over and stood at attention beside Yang Chendong. Direct Company Commander Wuxia reporting for duty. Why? Are you afraid that there won't be a battle to fight? Yang Chendong did not know what to say when he saw the dignified regiment commander taking on the responsibility of a company commander. Hee, isn't it more enjoyable to fight with the 6th young master? Wuxia blushed and smiled. This was snatching military merit in front of the 6th young master. He wouldn't be unhappy, right? Yang Chendong obviously knew what kind of people these officers were, especially people like Wuxia. It was as if he was born to fight. Once there was a battle, he would even forget about his wife and children. When it came to a big battle, he would immediately become the commander of the assault force. If you did not let him participate in the battle, it would be painful for him. Not wanting to dampen the enthusiasm of the officers, Yang Chendong did not refuse. Instead, he said, since you want to be the vanguard, why don't we make a bet? You take your direct company, and I'll take the 1st and 2nd guard squad. Let's see who can take down the city gate first. Although the 1st and 2nd guard squads had been expanded after the battle, they only had 60 people in total. The direct company of the regiment had 100 people. Wuxia could not help but show a strong fighting spirit. Okay, then let's compete. But 6th young master, what if we win? Seeing how confident Wuxia was, Yang Chendong smiled. Hanoi City has a total of 4 city gates. If you want to beat me, you'll have to take down at least 3. Are you confident you can do it? Wuxia was taken aback by this rhetorical question. He didn't know how to answer. On the other hand, Yang Chendong waved his hand casually. All right, if you can beat my guards, I'll give you 3 more machine guns later. Even for the Cold Front Regiment, Each company only had one machine gun.
If they had the chance to get 3 more, it would be equivalent to a lot of fighting power.
Wuxia was very happy. Then, 6th young master, it's a deal. Normally, they would not dare to talk to Yang Qindong like this. However, this was the battlefield, and they had the heart to compete. Naturally, they could be more casual.
Guards, follow me.
Yang Qindong was already a little impatient. After making a bet with Wuxia, he led 60 guards straight to the south gate. Yang Qindong chose to break through the south gate first. Wuxia began to order his direct company to choose the west gate. This was a competition with the 6th young master. Even if they could not win, they could not lose too badly. On the south gate, there were soldiers patrolling with torches from time to time. When Yang Qindong led the guards to the bottom of the city, they could even hear the voices of the Lansong Kingdom soldiers on the tower. Obviously, their defense was very lax. No one would have thought that an enemy would appear at this time. Prepare the triangle anchor. Yang Qindong raised his head and glanced at the 10-meter-tall city gate tower. A look of disdain flashed across his eyes.
With the anger in his heart, and with the help of some other items, climbing up the tower was just a matter of a blink of an eye. Usually, they were responsible for the safety of the 6th young master. Now that they finally had a chance to show off their skills, the 60 guards of the 2 small teams were very excited. Everyone wanted to be the first to show off. In the end, the 10 guards who had the best performance in climbing were quickly selected and became the first batch to climb the city. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.